All right. Yo, welcome back to Collectivitis, the podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. G'day, Max. How you doing?
Good morning, Pietro. How are you?
Good. Morning. We've just hit morning. It's almost afternoon. You get up pretty late nowadays, don't you, Max?
I am a night owl.
The early bird does not apply in your case. That's fine. We take all kinds here.
We're libertarians. We do what we fuck we want.
Oh, that's true. No, you have a strict bedtime, Max. Now we've had some really good guests the last two episodes, which has been great. The one problem we kind of found with having guests is because their stories tend to be so captivating and so compelling that we don't actually get to talk about sort of current events or anything to do with anything other than their story, because there's just so much to go into there, which is it's great, and we love doing that. But we thought today we'd do an episode with just us so that we can have a look at some things that are currently happening.
So basically, everyone gets to deal with our drab personalities today.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, your drab personality. I'm lovely. Thank you very much. But what we were going to talk about today is kind of the role that the right wing has with libertarianism, because it's an interesting little dichotomy. I think in that the right wing and libertarianism have a lot in common, right? There's a few things that libertarianism, and I'm talking more specifically here probably about the right wing in Australia and the US, because they're the ones I'm the most familiar with, but I'm sure it applies kind of everywhere else. But there's a couple of things that are key to libertarians that are really important, like small government, private property, individual rights, free markets, low taxes, which very much correlate with what the right wing at least purports to stand for. And these are key, not raising debt, not being in deficit, like the solid economy management type stuff. And the right wing certainly is all about that. And a criticism of libertarianism is often that you're kind of taking votes away or taking attention away from the right. Like, why don't you? And I think Jordan actually touched on this in his episode. Is there's this impression from the right that there's a role for libertarians within their party. So within the Liberal Party here, within the Republican Party in the US, why don't you just be a good libertarian within the right-wing party and steer that party towards the things that are important to libertarianism? And I guess that's the question of libertarian parties. Like, do you really need to exist? Why can't you guys just be part of the right? And I think that's a really interesting question. And it's certainly one that we don't have the final answer to, because let's say that the right wing turns really, really libertarian and becomes really, really good. There is the possibility that libertarians don't really need to exist. And then there's, of course, the satisfaction that comes with occasionally winning if you're part of a major party, which is a feeling that we don't often get. We very rarely get. But so that's kind of a criticism of libertarianism. It's like, oh, it's really nice that you guys are purists and you get to sit on your high horse of all your values, but why don't you join us and get down and dirty? Which is, I don't know, what are your thoughts, Max?
Well, my sort of argument to why we can't join the right or have the right become more libertarian is because they are inherently authoritarian. And that's something that will never change. They might take on board some libertarian values, but they're always going to be authoritarian. They're always wanting to govern over you and control your life. So that's my argument for why we could never merge or sort of at least try and achieve some nice winning feeling with them. I would rather stay true to my values and principles and not never win. I would like to win, but I'd be patient. And if it takes 30 years, 50 years, 60 years, it'll be worth it in the long run.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for not compromising on values at all. In a way, even being a libertarian party is kind of compromising on values, because it's like you're still taking part in the game of politics, which we inherently disagree with. So, yeah, I do agree with you.
There's a good saying, which is sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war, which I like.
Yeah, we've been losing heaps and heaps of battles, and somewhere in ages there's a war we're gonna win. That's how we look at this.
That's if we don't have our guns taken off us.
If we don't have our guns were taken a long time ago. Wow. That's a whole different topic. Like I'm sure we'll dissect that at another point. But that's another point where the right sort of typically does agree with libertarianism, especially in the US with the whole Second Amendment Republican movement. But yeah, and there's kind of there are some criticisms that you could make of the right, certainly on things that they aren't libertarian on. For example, like the war on drugs, pushing conservative views through the use of government, the war on terror, a really solid police state, like engaging in foreign wars and taking democracy overseas as if, it's our job as Western countries to be the world police, which are very much not libertarian and very much do fit into the right wing. So it's not that libertarianism and the right wing certainly are completely correlating and coincide with everything, but on certain big issues, such as right now, the economy and debt and, the threat of rampant inflation, on those things, at least in terms of what they're saying, the right wing supposedly agrees with us. And that's something that right now should be enough to make libertarians jump onto the right, if it were true that the right did these things, which is kind of what we can unpack today. Now, when we talk about the right here in Australia, we're talking about the Liberal Party. Max, you used to be on board with the Liberal Party, so they can't be all bad, right?
Well, yeah, I was raised in a Liberal Party voting family, quite conservative. My parents are true Liberals. Growing up, it was a different party for them than what it is now. It was the party of Menzies, as they say. So, the Liberal Party's values back then and what they claim to be now were like small government, your basic freedoms, the inalienable rights for everyone, free markets, small tax, blah, blah, blah. Which is a load of horseshit now, that they still claim to follow those values.
Well, that sounds like a libertarian platform. If you just said those things, exactly. If you just say them, it is the libertarian platform, which the difference is the start of the problem.
The difference is saying that and living those values. I think that's what separates us quite a lot. Anyway, so yeah, like the older I got, or as I become an adult, just disillusioned from big government, just see the same things every election cycle. Big government, whether it's Liberal or Labor, make problems, fix problems, and then act as if they're this big savior. Vote for us. Look what we just fixed. Sorry, you just fixed your own problem, you fucking idiots. So yeah, it's just that's, I suppose, I think we touched on it in the intro, but that's sort of what led me to libertarianism. But yeah, I was well on board with the Liberal Party growing up. I think that was also more so, not necessarily that I was on board with the Liberal Party. It was more so that I just looked at the left as idiots. I still do. But, you're sort of given a choice growing up. You've got to pick one side or the other. There's two options. It's a two-party race. And then as you get a little bit older and wiser, you become aware.
Yeah, well, and I think you've touched on something really important there, which is the fact that, and this is kind of a crime of the right, is, okay, so the left is openly statist, openly collectivist, if you want to drop the name of the podcast. We want a big welfare state. We want to increase government spending. We want more public programs. We want to take more taxes from the private sector. Okay, they're open, at least, about the fact that they're collectivist and big government, as you said. The problem is that the right presents itself as the alternative to that. And when I say the right, I mean like the big party on the right. So here, the Liberal Party, they present themselves as that alternative of being small government, of being, property rights, private property, individual freedoms, less taxes, economically sound. Like, they present themselves as that. And if you're only tangentially interested in politics, but where where your allegiances lie, what you think, and you don't believe in the left or big government or statism, you think, okay, well, I'll vote for the Liberal Party. Okay, fantastic. the option that they've presented when it actually comes to being in government is still statist. It's still big government. The debt that the Liberal Party accrued federally from 2013, they were in power from 2013 up until this year, was higher than the debt that Labor had accrued prior to that. It's like, okay, these things that you're saying are certainly enough to win you the vote of people who are ideologically aligned with the things you're saying. But in reality, all you've done is taken the people who want to be small government and funneled their votes into a party that is also big government. And that's why the two-party system is so important to the two major parties, because for them, as long as it's a two-horse race, you might not win this election, you might not win the next election, but eventually you'll win one. And this back and forth is absolutely perfect for both Liberal and Labor. The thing that Liberal and Labor are most concerned with is not necessarily winning the next election. It's keeping the status quo on the dichotomy between, either us or them. The best thing for the Liberal Party is the fact that they are seen as the alternative to the Labor Party. It's not any policies they have. It's not any groundswell movement or support or any sort of integrity or anything. Being the alternative to Labor is their absolute ace in the hole.
Well, you saw at the federal election, if they were attacking Teals, justified, but there was a huge message from both major parties, which was you can't trust the minor parties, you can't trust the independents this election. And that was because they were under threat big time. I don't have the actual stats, but, this election saw more votes not thrown at the major parties than ever before, because a lot more people are waking up. And I suppose that's what happens when you go totalitarian for a couple of years. A lot of people actually do become a bit wiser. But you saw that attack. Don't trust the independents. They're not real independents. Attacking the Teals, I think justified. Some parties a little bit justified. The only other parties other than the Lib Dems, I'd say, that would constantly stay true to their principles over their history would be the Greens and maybe the Socialists. And that's because their main principle is to be a fucking idiot.
Don't mince words today, Max. Jesus. Go.
I've got good coffee.
Go hard. If you want to go hard on the great man, don't pull back. No, you're right. The Teals aren't real independents, but certainly that attack on the independents is something that makes sense because, they're in survival mode. If the Liberal Party collapses, it can only be good for true libertarianism because it means that this faux adherence to classically liberal principles that they don't actually do is no longer sustainable. And there is a genuine desire for pushing actually libertarian or actually, freedom-minded liberty ideals. So something that I suppose, well, and you're right, both the major parties actually had a drop in their primary vote count. So I think Labor won and I think obviously increased their majority in seats, but actually had a smaller vote percentage than they had at the previous federal election, and obviously same with Liberal. Now, you also touched correctly on the authoritarianism of the last 2 years, and it's kind of the elephant in the room that we have to talk about is obviously the management of the pandemic really, really highlighted why the Liberal Party can't be trusted. From day dot of the start of the pandemic, well, not from day dot, but at least from a few months into the start of the pandemic, good libertarians had worked out that this is certainly there's no cause for locking down countries here. This is not enough to justify such an encroachment on individual rights and liberties. It's certainly not a reason to completely stall all of the free market and the economy and turn it entirely into a public system of everyone living paycheck to paycheck off the government's handouts. And the Liberal Party is just as culpable as the Labor Party in this because the Liberal Party was in charge federally. It was under Scott Morrison that, we agreed that we would lock down the country. And even though each state had the right to, do things in their own vein, the Liberal Party certainly didn't speak against it. And when it came to vaccine mandates, obviously a huge reason of why the major parties dropped in their percentage is because, this idea that you no longer have the right to your own body. And if you claim to have the right to your own body, you no longer have the right to work or to even participate in public life. And I'm not talking about public life like being politician, although that also came to a head. I'm talking about going to the shops. I'm talking about going to, retail stores. I'm talking about going to the pub. You are deemed unworthy to do that. And so I think, we saw there certainly a highlight as to why the Liberal Party no longer had, certainly during that period, had no right to claim any allegiance to classical liberalism at all, which is supposed to be their foundational philosophy. We also saw it in parliamentary. You weren't allowed to be part of parliamentary life in Victoria. Our two Liberal Democrats members, David Limbrick and Tim Quilty, who spoke against lockdowns, against mandates, against vaccine and mask mandates from very close to the start, were both vaccinated, both openly said that they weren't against the vaccine itself, but they were against the mandate, which is the correct position, according to libertarianism. They were excluded from Parliament, and when Parliament voted as to whether members of Parliament had to present their vaccine status to be allowed to be in Parliament and to vote on things, which is, they're not there because other parliamentarians allow them to do that. They're there to represent constituents. And both Liberal and Labor together voted against allowing elected members of Parliament into Parliament. And we had the Parliament in Exile, which David, Tim, and Catherine Cummings went and did. So like any semblance of allegiance to classical liberalism was truly hampered there. So I mean, and that's kind of the crux of it, right? Is when the rubber hit the road, the Liberal Party really showed that they have delved a long way away from what people think the Liberal Party is, and that they survive off this legacy of having been what they supposedly were, and they have gone just so far away from it. Thoughts? Is that?
Yeah, I think with, touching on how far they've drifted from their actual values, they're free falling into irrelevance at a very quick rate. And that, I mean, obviously we want to see a Libertarian Party elected, but in terms of having a two-party system, it's not the worst thing in the world having a bit of balance between Liberal and Labor. But with the rate that the Liberal Party are falling, it would not surprise me if they just go AWOL for like 20 years and don't get elected, which is concerning in its own right, because then you go down this totalitarian, authoritarian government who just hold power, do whatever the fuck they want, because they know they'll just keep getting in every 3 years.
Correct. And so this is what I think is the role of the Libertarian Party here. Now, in the US, the role of the Libertarian Party is a little bit different because they can't really get any members elected into Parliament just because they have that first past the post, and they don't have preferential voting either. So Libertarian votes in the US really are taking votes away from either the Republicans or the Democrats, but mostly the Republicans, because Libertarians, good Libertarians, tend to be more right aligned on those key issues. So over there, the role of the Libertarian Party really is to kind of hold the Republicans to account, okay, we've got enough of a base to vote to win you or lose you this election, be better Republicans, and we'll allow you to win, kind of is their way of shifting the conversation to improve the right-wing party, to make them less statist, to make them less interventionist in foreign wars, to make them less flippant on printing money and on the whole unholy matrimony between the government and the Federal Reserve over there, and same here. Here, I think the role of the Libertarian Party, because we get a bit more of a platform with being able to get members elected, such as David and Tim, due to our system, and because through preferential voting, a vote to a Libertarian Party or a minor party isn't necessarily a vote taken away from the right wing, because it still allows them to win on the two-party preferred. You can vote minor party, but as long as you put Liberal over Labor, your vote goes to Liberal. Because of that, I think the role of the Libertarian Party or Libertarian or minor parties or whatever you like here is to shift the Overton window. Have you heard the Overton window?
Yep, of course.
So I'll briefly explain in case there's any listeners who haven't. The Overton window is basically this made up term that to describe the short window in which allowable discussion is, and it shifts and moves over time. So one day you might never be able to talk about, like right now, if you talk about the Overton window in Australia, being extremely pro-gun is outside the Overton window. If you're extremely pro-gun, it's kind of not allowed in discussion. But over time, if lots and lots of people start leaning in that direction, start talking about it, and the media starts talking about it, it might be within the Overton window. And you can talk about gun rights and that sort of thing, which elsewhere is allowable. But right now, here, it's not in the Overton window. Right now, the Overton window in Australia is so far left that the Liberal Party kind of doesn't have a choice but to lean that way, or to try and shift the window. And more what they've done is they've just tried to fit into as right as they can go within the Overton window. So now you hear like the Liberal Party talking about, renewables and various other woke things, and, increasing public spending in certain areas, and handing out money just before elections, because that's what the Overton window is here. The Overton window has been pushed so far by the left, and largely due to the Greens, they're at fault for that they have to talk within these topics that they've already lost. They've already given up on their principle by fitting into this. And so the battle's already kind of lost. And that's why the Liberal Party has been such a failure. Problem is, I don't think that the Overton window represents the vast majority of people. They had the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Convention, about a week or two ago. So conservative, just anyone who's conservative goes to this convention, and it's a whole bunch of really interesting speakers from around the world. And the Liberal Party got absolutely lambasted at this thing, because there is actually a conservative base that is completely betrayed, because the Liberal Party tries to fit in and tries to win votes off the left and tries to fit in with this Overton window. So the role of the Libertarian Party in Australia especially, I think, is to shift this Overton window. That is the absolute first thing that we can do. And that allows the right-wing party or the Conservative Party to be good on the things that they're good on. Now, they're not going to be good on drug legalization and legalization of sex work and certain other things, but the things they can be good on, this will allow them to be good on. And when we're talking about the things that are a bit more left-leaning about libertarians, the left's winning. So those things are already going to happen. We're much closer to decriminalization of marijuana than we are to having a sound currency. And, as much as legalization of marijuana is absolutely a libertarian thing, having sound currency is a much more pressing issue. It's much more important. And so the thing I wanted to kind of highlight with this shifting of the Overton window is something that the Libertarian Party was successful in shifting the Overton window, and that was being dead against the pandemic legislation of late 2021, dead against mandates, dead against the government response, dead against the government not releasing the health orders through which they imposed the mandates. So we've done all of these things, and what I want to show you is a very interesting video by Matthew Guy and the Liberal Party just a few days ago, where they reveal their policies for this upcoming state election.
First, we will ensure there will be no vaccine mandates during any future pandemics, except in acute health, disability and aged care settings. People shouldn't have to choose between their job and their personal health choices. We will enforce this with new laws to be introduced if we're elected on November 26. In addition, we will guarantee no more lockdowns. We will prevent Victorians being locked out of their own state ever again. We'll enshrine the right to free speech and democratic freedoms like the right to protest. We'll hold a royal commission into the handling of COVID-19 in Victoria. We will ensure that all health advice relating to decision-making is released for everyone to see. We will amend the Victorian Constitution Act to limit a state of emergency or state of disaster declaration to only 30 days. And we will repeal Daniel Andrews' 2021 pandemic legislation. These are sensible changes that will ensure any future pandemics are appropriately managed. The days of world record lockdowns, locking Victorians out of their own state, playground closures, curfews, vaccine mandates are behind us, and they should never ever happen again. We can keep Victorians safe while also protecting your freedoms and your democratic rights. And that's exactly what our comprehensive future pandemic management plan will do.
Wow.
All right, I'll let you have at it first, Max.
All those dot points that were listed down the screen, I think the Liberal Party forgot to include the asterisks next to them to say, yes, no vaccine mandates, but what a load of horseshit.
No vaccine mandates from 2022 onwards. No lockdowns from 2022 onwards.
So the Liberal Party have the advantage only in the sense that they weren't in power in Victoria for the last 8 years, whatever it is, but during the pandemic. Because if they were in power, for them to come out and claim that we wouldn't have done all this is false. I know that's not what they're claiming there. They're claiming that if they get elected, that's what they'll do. They would have done so much similar. They would have had vaccine mandates. They would have had lockdowns. What a load of shit. They would have had some sort of pandemic legislation, I'm guessing. Maybe not as crazy as Dan Andrews' one, but there still would have been something.
Look at New South Wales. That was a Liberal government, and they did exactly what the Victorian government did, minus a couple of things, but the vast majority would have been dead against that. And certainly they didn't speak up against any of what was being done.
Yeah, exactly. That state of emergency, limited to 30 days, bullshit. It'd be 30 days with an extension. Because there were already those safeguards in place for state of emergencies. Was it 3 months or something in Victoria?
Yeah. They had to repass it every 3 months or something.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it just continually got repassed, and it reached the maximum time frame or whatever, and that was when the permanent pandemic legislation powers came in. So for the Liberal Party to claim or to act like they wouldn't have done the same thing is a load of bullshit. Like I said, they had the advantage of not being in power, so they can see what the Labor Party have done wrong, and we wouldn't do that. But yeah, they're lost. They're irrelevant now. They're just
nail in the coffin. Max has decided the Liberal Party is irrelevant. Sorry, Liberal Party. I know you guys have heaps of money and heaps of MPs, but Max on the Collectivitis podcast has decided that you guys are done. So pack it in, change your name, become the Liberal Democrats, and maybe you'll have a chance in 50 years.
We are the Overton window right here. We dictate where it is. We are announcing that it's shifting today.
Yeah, I'm actually announcing that thanks to emergency powers granted to me and Max by our mums, that we're actually shifting the Overton window, and now you're only allowed to align with our views.
Exactly.
What
are your thoughts?
My thoughts, well, okay, so let's break it down a little bit. It is really easy to be anti-mandate and anti-lockdown right now. Nobody in public discussion is still talking about mandates. The few mandates that still exist purely in either aged care areas where they, make some argument for the safety of elderly people or people who are at risk, and in areas where they simply, because every time the state takes power in a crisis, it never fully gives it back. And there's areas where there's just, because of hangover laws and leftover rules and stuff, they still haven't taken mandates off. But by and large, mandates right now, no one sees a need for them. It's really easy to speak against them. It's really easy to speak against lockdowns. Imagine trying to lock down again now, even though because of Omicron, cases were much, much, much higher when we didn't have lockdowns, and hospitalizations and deaths were much, much, much higher when, we'd already given up on lockdowns. Lockdowns are extremely politically unpopular now. It's very easy to come out with these arguments now. Granted, these are the best policies the Liberal Party has had, definitely in 2 years, probably even prior to this. Is a really great set of policies. Now, they're exactly the same as the Liberal Democrats' policies, which is curious, and a lot of the other minor parties' policies as well. A lot of those freedom minor parties certainly are all for never lockdown again, never mandate again, Royal Commission into the handling of the COVID pandemic. Yes, fantastic. We can all agree on all of these things, but it's really cowardly to come out now against vaccine mandates. Let's take it back to mid to late 2021 and remember just the tension and the complete public brainwashing 24/7 media cycle telling you that anti-vaxxers and people protesting against lockdowns and protesting against mandates were right-wing neo-Nazi extremists. And anyone who went to any of these protests, the first thing they saw was, holy shit, these are just families and regular people. And this could be my neighbor. And they'd see people they knew and they'd be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that we were both living in this isolated bubble. And we actually both think that what's happening is retarded.
Weren't we all white supremacists too? Even though those protests were the most diverse group of people I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, a lot of the western suburbs were the most highly represented among the protesters, which, are Italian, Greek, Lebanese descent people and yeah, white supremacists.
You've got the Vietnamese who came here to escape communism. They were some of the first ones protesting with us because they were like, this looks a little bit familiar.
Exactly. Yes. So the tension at that time was absolutely palpable. And when David and Tim spoke up in Parliament, they were painted with the most abhorrent brush. And they were putting not just their reputation as parliamentarians on the line, they were putting their personal lives on the line. They became the face of this movement that was so unpopular, according to the media, according to the authorities, according to the Liberal Party as well as the Labor Party. And yet, because of principles that libertarians stand for, they had to do it. They had no other choice. Because we are a libertarian party, you have to take the libertarian position on these things, which is perfect. There's no wiggle room. There's no room for the Overton window is shut right now. We're libertarians, right? Our Overton window is the truth. So it doesn't matter what public discussion is, there's the truth. And so what they did then was pretty much say the exact same things that are being said now, but the difference is in the level of courage that it took at the time to say it. And just to highlight how horrific the Overton window was at that time and how, I lost friends, I'm sure you lost friends because of nothing more than our views and because of what government and media told people. Now, if you'd ever tried to, if you were ever in a position to try to describe to someone that you and I are no longer going to be friends in 2 years' time because the government and the media tells you that I'm a bad person, and you take their word over our knowledge of each other, they would never have believed it. But this is the power of propaganda. And it wasn't just propaganda, a couple of messages here and there. It was all that was happening anywhere. Any TV you turned on, there were ads throughout whatever show you're watching about getting vaccinated. Keep everyone safe. If you're not vaccinated, you're not keeping people safe. We need to lock down to keep each other safe. Staying together. So staying apart brings us together, or whatever those slogans were. It was just completely palpable on one side of the tension then. And I'll just show you another video. Now, this was on Channel 7 News, just to highlight quite how vitriolic the hatred for the non-vaccinated was. This was on Channel 7's Sunrise program, which is quite a popular program. And this is
gross.
This is what they were. This is what they were airing at Christmas of 2021.
Now, as Christmas approaches, many of us will be faced with a new dilemma: how to handle unvaccinated loved ones and whether you should spend time with them over the festive season, sit next to them at Christmas dinner.
So how do you find out who is vaccinated, and how do you decide whether to invite them over for Christmas lunch? We've got the tips and the tricks to help you avoid awkward encounters. They say you can't choose your family, and it's never more relevant than at Christmas. Apart from the glazed ham and stuffed turkey, there'll also be an elephant in many dining rooms this festive season: the vaccination status of your nearest and dearest.
I'd invite them.
So, Jesus Christ. Imagine trying to stand by those questions and those views and that tone, like the jolly Christmas music playing in the background while you talk about not inviting your friends and family to Christmas lunch is just, it's absolutely absurd. It's totalitarian.
You know, a lot of people claim that like these media outlets and stuff were paid off to promote the vaccine. I don't think they were. I think the propaganda and brainwashing was that strong that they genuinely thought this is the right message to send. Those hosts, the fact that they can keep a straight face while running that segment shows just how brainwashed they were. Everybody was almost like militarized to fucking push this agenda. You know, I'm not your friend. You can't come to fucking Christmas. You can't come to family Christmas because you are the exact same person you were 2 years ago by not getting a vaccine. It makes me sick, actually. It actually makes me sick.
It is almost hard to find words for it all. And I think this is also part of the problem with the right and the left and the state in general. Let's call it the state, because let's stop picking on the Liberal Party when, in fact, it is true that the Labor Party on this was certainly worse.
Just want to clarify, I might have touched on this earlier, but I think the reason we're attacking the Liberal Party so hard today, and a little bit with previous episode with Jordan Ditloff, is because naturally we will attack the left every chance we get. So we kind of just need like a little period to get our hatred for the Liberal Party out.
Well, there's no redeeming aspects to the left, barring, you know, a couple of issues they happen to be correct on, such as, you know, marijuana or whatever. But the right is hypocritical.
Yeah,
that's why it's a betrayal from the right to give in to these things. From the left, you expect it. I don't expect the left to do anything other than lockdowns. I don't expect the left to do anything when there's a chance to grab state power, but grab state power. The right, at least in theory, says that it won't.
I'm actually amazed that Labor Party federally and this upcoming state election aren't running on like a lockdown policy. Like we will enact more lockdowns because, you know, their supporters fucking loved it. They were like, fuck yeah, lockdown. This is exactly what I want.
Oh, if there's any hint of a reason to lock down to keep people safe, because that's always the excuse that the left uses, is you give up, you know, you're giving up some freedom here, but it's for safety. You're unsafe, and that's why you have to give up the freedom.
Got to save grandma.
Yeah, you got to save grandma and all of that. That's how they subsist. But I did want to touch on something you said earlier, because there is a problem with the state in all of this, which is, you know, lobbyists and corporatism. You know, this idea that a lot of the criticisms of capitalism and of the free market is, okay, well, what about when, you know, big pharma or big tech or whatever work hand in hand with the government and create a monopoly? That's capitalism failing. Well, no, it's not, because the free market, to be free, requires that there is no overbearing state that can be used to exert that dominance. Big pharma, you know, all those pharmaceutical companies that pushed the vaccine, pushed it through the use of state power, right? There's a reason. Who do you think paid for those vaccines that were mandated throughout society? It was the government, which paid through money that it hadn't even created yet. So it's this unholy matrimony of the state and, you know, corporations that are willing to monopolize by using the state that creates the worst of all, you know, corporatism. And when a lot of lefties kind of attack capitalism and horrific things that capitalism does, often they're actually correct in what they're attacking, but what they're really attacking is not capitalism, it's corporatism. It's not the free market, it's this unholy matrimony. And, you know, there's loads of examples of it. The censoring of people on Twitter and on Spotify and on Facebook and stuff, even throughout the pandemic, it shows part of that unholy matrimony between big tech and the government. But throughout the pandemic, like, it was, you actually had to be looking the other way to not see the existence of this unholy matrimony between big pharma and the government.
Speaking of which, what's our time frame until we get that misinformation tag or fact check, or this podcast contains COVID-19 content, vaccine info? What do you reckon? A week? 2 weeks? How long?
I'm hoping to get it this episode. We kind of held back, but
if we just say the
I
word vaccine about 400 times, we might get there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've said it too many times.
Speaking of which, this is appropriate because yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of general vaccine mandates coming into place in Victoria. So it's quite fitting that this is what we're talking about today as well, because it's not a nice anniversary. I've had nicer anniversaries in my life.
But it is, because where we were 1 year ago right now, if you listen to the powers that be, you and I and anyone else who thought different to the system, who went against the grain, who didn't believe in, subjecting ourselves to authoritarian power, we were told you would be excluded from life for years. This is not a short-term thing. You can't outlast us. You lost your job. I was an English and history teacher at an all boys school. What were you doing prior to the?
I was bartending. So, a professional alcoholic, as I like to call it. Not only was I forbidden from working, I was forbidden from even going to the pub and having a beer.
Professional alcoholic and professional enabler. You're an alcoholic enabler if you're a bartender as well. So that's a cooler job than mine. But both of these areas, which are certainly not considered to be way out there, super state involved areas of life. Both of us had to lose our jobs. So if you look at where we were in a year ago and the position that it looked, or we were told that we were heading into, like this year has just been one slow, excruciating, long case of I told you so. And they're not even pleasant I told you so's, because they're I told you so's that you're giving to people who have alienated you and whatnot. And the most horrific thing I realize now is that anyone who was advocating for lockdowns and mandates and all that stuff, then when they were being told that they were the good and the holy and the righteous, don't want to talk about it now. Now that it's so clear that they were wrong and actually they went real authoritarian and really horrible to people they knew, they don't want to have those conversations now. Why are you talking about COVID? It's over. COVID's over. The pandemic's over. Get over it.
Speaking of I told you so's as well, it was like, we could predict this coming from a fucking mile away. Like, we knew what was happening with mandates, lockdowns. You just said. I remember having so many conversations with people and I was like, yep, you know what? I reckon I'll be out of work in a month or two because of mandates, blah, blah, blah. And after that finished berating me for being a crazy right-wing neo-Nazi, for being a neo-Nazi, anti-vaxxer. Yeah. They were like, that won't happen. They're not going to enforce vaccine mandates. And I was like, they will. I don't want to be right. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm truly hoping I'm wrong. Yeah. And no, I wasn't wrong. But yeah, that I told you so. I'm not proud about it. It's not, I'm not happy that I was right.
Yeah. And there's like that Churchill quote, those who don't learn from the past or from history are due to repeat it. I'm sure I butchered there, but it's something along those lines. We really should be learning from what has just happened. Anyone who can now see through the fact that the government used a crisis to increase its power and to increase public reliance on them as, the one and true and, God being that will look after us. Anyone who can see that the state uses every one of these crises should be on high alert to never let them do that again. And instead, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to believe that our state is authoritarian and overbearing and will crush us at the first sign of dissent. If anything, if you were okay throughout the COVID period, and if you never suffered or never experienced discrimination or anything, you were just lucky that your views aligned with those of the state, because that's the only reason that you were allowed to, and that's true always and everywhere. And that's part of the reason why even conservatives who push their conservative views onto the state is still a bad thing, because views that aren't pro-liberty being pushed onto the state just means that someone else is being discriminated against for not having the correct views. Yeah, you might have a really conservative, anti-drug, pro-foreign war, right-wing government at some point that you really, really agree with. But the problem is that while you may be living, in a bubble of well-being during that time, you've created an institution that has so much power and so much authority that as soon as that power and authority switches to the other side, you've gone from being completely well off to being completely subjugated. And that's the true inherent problem with a large state and statism in general, is that, you're assuming that it will do good, and it doesn't.
Well, like mandates, they weren't there to protect people. They were there to punish dissent. How dare you have a narrative different to what we're pushing? How dare you encourage people to think freely and make choices for themselves? You must follow our agenda, join this single file, and don't you dare stray off it.
Absolutely. I will ask one last question, because I think we've actually gone quite a while onto this episode now, which is good. We've got lots to say. Is the right wing salvageable? Is there a role for libertarians in the right wing? Is there a role for a libertarian party? I know we've probably already made it clear what we think, but that's kind of the overall question that I was hoping to answer within this episode. What do you think, Max?
I think there's two fronts you can look at this from. Is the right wing salvageable in a two-party system as being an opposition? Possibly, but it's going to take a long time. Is the right wing salvageable to liberty-minded people and libertarians? No, because although their values may shift, even though they pretend to follow the values of Menzies, they will always be overall and inherently authoritarian, and that's something that will never be salvageable to a libertarian. Is there a role for libertarians in the right wing? Yes, but only to hold them from account and to stop them. I did say that they will always be overall authoritarian, but if you do have libertarians in the right wing, it will stop them from being crazy authoritarian. Is there a role? Sorry, just to answer your last question. Is there a role for a libertarian party? Always, especially in Australia, where we have a voting system that I won't say favors minor parties, but it allows minor parties to actually have a chance, be it small. There is a role for a libertarian party, even if we don't get elected to government and hold power. As we've seen in Victoria, having two elected MPs allows you to keep the major parties to account. And that is something that is so important to a libertarian, is making sure that the overbearing left wing and right wing don't double down and fuck you over. Where I say we, the Libertarian Party, is there, to hold them accountable and to keep balance.
Yeah, and without doubling up on those questions as you've answered, I think there is the idea of, don't throw out the good in search of the perfect, or whatever that expression is. Don't give up on something that's pretty good because it's not your perfect ideal. Like, even as libertarians, you can still say, okay, there are small or even sizable things that we can change and we can affect to do good, even though it's not the perfect ideal libertarian outcome. I'd say, as an example, let's say the right really was good on currency and on the economy and on not destroying the value of money and creating, using the Reserve Bank and the Federal Reserve to create hyperinflation and whatever else. Let's say the right wing were really good on that, then yes, absolutely, it would be fine for the libertarians or real libertarians to throw their weight in behind that. Let's say the left and the old traditional left, because the left doesn't, and the right doesn't do this anymore either, but the old traditional left was anti-war and anti-foreign intervention. Let's say there were elements of the left that were still pushing that agenda, not pushing the world on the brink of nuclear war between Russia and Ukraine through just, the most horrific proxy war actions that the US and us, because we follow them, have been doing. If there were a left-wing faction that were really pushing for that, it wouldn't be wrong for libertarians to assist that as well. There's certainly room for, okay, how can we exert libertarianism through the institutions that currently exist? The problem is that neither of them are talking about these things. The problem is that it is just libertarians right now who are talking about the two most important issues, for me anyway. And that's why not only is there room for a libertarian party, it's actually the most important thing right now is that this voice does grow and does get heard.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Perfect. Well, we're in total agreement. Surprise, surprise. We have ended up in total agreement. I reckon that surprised both of our mums. We've actually had a few more viewers, so thank you to everyone who's jumped on board and watched us, not just our mums, largely due to our fantastic guests over the last 2 episodes. I'm really happy how this is going. I hope you're equally thrilled, Max.
I am 100%. I'm hoping. Well, so this is episode number 4. So if we get to 5 before Spotify kicks us off for being crazy conspiracy theorists, then I'll be happy with that.
I reckon you're asking for it. You keep saying it like, "Oh no, please don't kick me off Spotify." You just want to get kicked off. You just want to have that feather in your cap.
I'm a busy man. I don't have time to podcast. If it gets canned, then I don't have to come up to you and be like, "Hey, Pietro, I don't really have time to do this podcast anymore."
You're allowed to go back to the pub now, so you're.
I know
this is too much work for you. It's taken away from your quality time.
I've got a pub that's a 200-meter walk from my home. We might do the next Collectivitis from there.
Yeah, we could do a future episode in there. That'd be fun. Anyway, that's enough bullshit from us. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you later, Max, and I'll catch you later, everyone else.
Take care.
Bye.